A lot of development organizations these days are really challenged by getting features out on time, on a given schedule, and at the same time keeping the quality up. And one of the key challenges is very often that when the QA process is separated from a development process, QA becomes an afterthought. Then at the end of, before the release is due, everybody's trying to get everything in at the same time. I'm a big believer, and a lot of people are, and that's one of the mantras actually of Agile. You should really test your code as you develop that, meaning interleaving development very tightly with testing. The first phase of our test automation effort was focused on just getting the test automated. The next phase was really focused on interleaving the test creation with the actual code development. And what we realized 2 years ago, that there's actually not a good process by which you can measure what we call adequacy of tests, meaning have I have written enough tests that serves as some kind of sign-off criteria saying that I can move on from that feature development to the next feature development. So to give you an example what we did, right? We actually used code coverage as one measure to get an idea, are we doing adequate testing or not? And we were on two parts of our product, the front-end part and analysis part, we had 83% code coverage. That's a pretty respectable number. Yet it didn't give us any guidance when we developed new code where we needed to focus our test development. Should we increase the code coverage from 83% to 85%? Is it 2% that we just pick? Is that the right code? We didn't really know. And that's actually a very common problem. It's not only a problem for us, it's a problem in the entire industry. And that's one of the major shortcomings of code coverage. Code coverage tells you, you don't do no testing, you do some testing, but you don't necessarily know whether you do good testing. So what we did in order to focus our test development, we did a little experiment. And the experiment was motivated by, what if we focus our development on new code rather than old code? So old code may be code, for example, that has been released previously in the last release, has been out in the field. We feel pretty good about it. A few bugs have been discovered so far. So if we focus now the code coverage on new code, it turns out that there's much less code that we need to cover. To give you a concrete example, 83% for the front end and analysis part boils down to 220,000 lines of uncovered code. Out of these 220,000 lines of code, when we focus on code from the last release during the experiment we made 2 years ago, it turned out only 850 lines of code needed to be tested. This is suddenly something that becomes practical. This is something I can put a developer or test engineer on and essentially do focused test development to cover those. So that experiment essentially led to the aha. There is something in it. There is something where if I use essentially some analysis technology to focus on the critical code for test development, essentially zooming in, a magnifying glass, which I can use to essentially guide developers and test engineers to write the right test, that sounded like an idea for a new product, and that sounded like an idea for our internal development process. That was really the birth of Test Advisor, which we started out as a prototype. It turned out to work. It turned out, we could essentially make it work in an environment that was similar to ours. We started full development on that, and in October 2012 we launched a new product called Test Advisor. Once we had the prototype up and running for Test Advisor, we did an internal experiment where we asked one test developer to utilize Test Advisor on a particular part of our product weekly. So every week he spent a few hours utilizing Test Advisor, and he did this over the period of 3 months. And we measured the number of tests we were writing and as well as the number of defects that we were finding. So over the course of 3 months, he wrote 29 additional tests and found 19 bugs by adding these tests to our test suite. What's very interesting is that about half of these bugs were actually found that a test actually failed, meaning he wrote a test and the test failed, scratched his head, what's wrong with the code, and there was a bug in the code. The other half were actually found by just Test Advisor showed him essentially particular code he should write more tests for. By looking at the code, He thought that doesn't look right, so he was thinking about the code, and it turns out it was actually wrong. So he found a bug by just pure inspection, led by Test Advisor. Test Advisor now gave us a mean by which we could essentially now qualify, is the code truly adequately tested, and if not, it shows up essentially as a defect or defect kind issue that needs to be taken care of by the developer before he or she can move on to the next feature. I would like to give you some reference from one of our top developers, a senior architect in the compiler team. He's very hard on himself and his colleagues in terms of the quality of the code he's developing. He verbatimly said that Test Advisor made him a better developer because it made him think about the code, made him think about the tests he needs to write the code, and as a result, he wrote better tests for the code themselves. We utilize our own product for our product development. We call this product on product, or POP. Quality Advisor and Security Advisor we have used for a long time on a daily basis, where we analyze the code at every build, and the defects that are found depending on the criticality we eliminate as we develop the code forward going. With the launch of Test Advisor since the last release, we also have introduced Test Advisor in production, and we almost Coverity Test Advisor clean at this point for the next release. One of the interesting aspects I would like to mention is that Quality Advisor and Security Advisor, which rely on static analysis technology, find defects that are very complementary that you find with traditional testing encouraged by Test Advisor. Test Advisor is really focused on unit testing, component testing, finds functional types of bugs, whereas Quality Advisor finds very rare bugs that are not necessarily executed in a traditional test environment. As one of the results of our efforts in test automation, the number of founds that were actually found by customers, or customer found defects, reduced significantly over the last 2 years. After initial spike, after the first release, we actually reduced now the number of customer found defects by 30%. And we expect that this continues, that trend, as we increase the test automation. To demonstrate the impact of the test automation, during the last 2 years, we added a lot of functionality to our product and added actually 2 new products. At the same time, we didn't increase the size of the end-to-end testing team. So if we had not bet on test automation, today we would not be able to close a release in the same time frame that we did it 2 years ago. On our journey from a QA testing focused process to a development testing focused process, we are not through yet. We're probably 2/3 through. We still have a lot of work ahead of us for Coverity Connect to automate more tests. And moreover, in the next phase, we're going to interleave the code development very tightly with the test development. That means whenever someone wants to move on from a feature to the next feature, the code has to be Test Advisor clean, meaning the tests are in place, the tests are passing, and there are no violations in terms of Test Advisor anymore.